Okay, here's a demo on how to automate integration testing with your APIs using Postman and Jenkins. Quick overview, what we're going to do is these are the steps I listed out. I'm not going to actually install Postman because I already have it installed. But you would install Postman, and here is the URL to get Postman, which you can get to right here. If you guys haven't used Postman before, it was originally a Chrome web extension, but now it's actually a full application that you can download. Um, see here. Next part would be create your unit tests in Postman, and that's done with JavaScript. We'll go through a demo showing you that. And then we'll be installing Node.js, npm, and Newman to run this via the command line. And then we'll test that with the Newman tool command line. If that's successful, basically we'll install Node and Newman on a Jenkins server. And then we'll create a build item and add a build step in Jenkins that will essentially run a PowerShell file to call out your Newman commands. So let's start with the demo. So I'm launching Postman here. So this is the interface. Here is a collection that they have, oh, I'm sorry, that I created called demo test. And I have two endpoints in there, which I'm going to use to run this demo. The endpoints are calling an opens API, which uses a authentication token to get weather information based on city ID or city name. Briefly, let me talk about what environment variables are in Postman. So you go in here, manage environments. So environment variables are basically key value pairs of variables that you could plug in to your tests. For instance, the app ID I have here is this value here. That was just the key that I've got from the API that I would have to use for each request for authentication purposes. Um, City name, city ID, actually, um, I create. It starts off with blank, but I'll explain why there's a value in there. But you can actually create variables without a value, which I'm going to do right now. I'm going to update. So the first request I'm going to check is get weather by random city ID. So let me explain that. First, let me show you the API that we're going to be calling. Okay, so this weather API, basically you could have a couple of functionalities of like historical data. There's a whole bunch of slews of things here, but I only chose two endpoints to simplify things. But in order to access, you need to sign up for an API key. So that you could do that with any email address, which I did, and that is the key that I'm using for this demo. Now, remember I was showing you the environment variables. See how the texts are in orange here? It starts with bracket, bracket, your variable name, and closing two curly brackets. So that's why it's in orange, because Postman knows that it's an environment variable. And then when you run this, these environment variables get replaced with whatever is in your whatever is specified in your key value list. Okay, so I didn't add anything in the city ID. If you recall, see there's no value. You can see there's no value listed in that bubble. App ID, there is a value. Okay, so what you could do is in your pre request. So right now I have a list of arrays of cities, city IDs. These city IDs are I've gotten from that weather API website. There was a whole bunch of them, but for the purpose of this demo, I just chose 10 cities and their ID here. So what I'm basically doing is using JavaScript and say, get me a round number from 1 to 10, which the 1 to 10 denotes the indexes of, oh, actually it should be 0. Probably should be 0 and 10. Or is it 1 to 10? Razor 0 index. 1 to 9. That's probably what it should be. So get a random ID, and then what it does is from the array, just grab some random city ID, and then set that value to the environment variable called city ID. So what happens when I click on send? It's going to run through his JavaScript, get some random city ID, write it to this variable, okay? And then on my response back, it executes whatever is in your test tab. And I'll show you that in a second. So let me just run this endpoint. Okay. So endpoint returned back with some JSON data. And my pre-request, remember how it wrote value to the city ID? You can actually check that in your environments. Here, it looks like it chose city ID of Seattle, which I'll show you where the city name came from. But look, yep, you can see the values getting right there. So in my test of this endpoint, let me explain what JSON I'm doing. Basically, I'm just parsing the response here in this object, and then I'm saying, okay, set that variable city name to whatever is getting returned back in my data dot name property. So you can see here's my data, here's my name property, it's Seattle. So on the response, it runs the JavaScript, finds this property name, and copies the value, which is Seattle, into this variable called city name. Now, PM is Postman. And if you expand this, there's a bunch of snippets on how to run some tests. And this one is setting your status code to 200. There's a whole bunch of samples on their websites and what to do. If you click on it, basically just pastes it into your body. So it's pretty nice. But I already did that previously. So basically what this is saying is pm.test, the description of your test. So I'm saying status code is 200, or actually that was auto-generated. But the function is postman.response to have status 200. Easy enough to read. So since I already ran that, you can actually go to your test results and look at all the tests. Right now, I only have one test, and it's called status goes 200. And it passed because it was a 200. So that was my first endpoint. Okay. My next endpoint, I'm getting weather by city name, and I'll show you what that looks like. So city name takes a query string of q equals whatever your city name is, comma, I think that's the country code or abbreviation, US, and your token. So remember in my previous call, I already populated city name with a value, which was Seattle. So so what it's gonna now is gonna call this endpoint with the name Seattle. And I don't have anything in my pre-request, but let's take a look at my test. I start off with the same parsing of my JSON data into an object. And right now I actually have, looks like, let me clean this up here. Okay, so I have 4 tests. The first one is saying, does my city name match my request? City name matches request. And what am I doing here? First, I create a flag called contains, right? Set to false, which is the default value. And I'm saying, okay, Postman, go get my environment variable called city name, all right, which is populated from the previous request, which is right now Seattle. right? So I declare it to a variable, and I'm saying, does this response for this request, the name prop, does it match um, the city? Essentially, it's from the city name variable. Basically, what I'm doing is from one request, getting a random city, right? Putting that into a variable, and then using a second endpoint, using that variable to make my request. And my test is making sure like the request city ID matches uh, the response city. So if it does match, I'll just change the contains value to true. If it doesn't, I just console log unexpected city. Oh, console log gets written to Postman's console, which you can actually run right here. It's a good idea sometimes to have it open while you're doing some of these tests, because it sometimes gets a little difficult in debugging the JavaScript here. But you could do like console.log and it will actually write out to this console. Where am I at here? I'm still at this test. Then I'm saying Postman expect contains to be true. So basically, I'm saying this flag needs to be true. That's this test. So my second test is I'm just saying the object needs to contain weather. Um, so it's probably easier if I just run the request. Okay, so let's look at my test results here. So let's go through the test one by one. City matches request. Yay, it passes because, like I said, city name matches the name from the response. The response here was Seattle. In Seattle, based on the ID that I grabbed, right? Here's the body of when I requested by ID, I got Seattle. And here is the response by getting city by its name, it's also Seattle. So basically, I'm just doing what I'm trying to illustrate is you could use the response from one request into another request. So that passed. This one, object, contains object weather. In my JSON data, I loop through it. Do I have a key called weather? And it just loops through objects and it finds weather. Then I set the flag to true, that contains flag to true. And then I say PM expect contains to be true, which it passes. The failure, I'm doing string contains rain, right? Default set, I set contains to be false. I'm sorry. Oh, that's wrong. That should be rain. That's what I meant to do. So let me run this again and see what happens. Okay. Looks like it doesn't contain rain because I'm saying a response text to include whatever my expected value that I set, which is rain. And clear skies. So it's not gonna rain tomorrow, or it's not gonna rain, or it's not raining now in Seattle. Last test does not contain snow, which it doesn't, because it's clear. Does not contain snow. Basically, doing the inverse of the contains test. PM expect whatever this response text is to not include. You can look on Postman's documentation on how some of these how this language works, but it's pretty easy to read. There's a whole bunch of examples out there, but that's pretty much how that works. All right, so showed you guys the test from each endpoint. Show you how one response from one endpoint is used in subsequent requests. So I believe, let me show you the collection runner. In Postman, a runner, which launch here, setting my environment. Environment is basically your collection variables that you've I'm sorry, the environment variables that I've declared, and I call that open demo weather app. And when I run it, now it's going to run my test sequentially. This fails because, yeah, it's not raining, right? It's clear in Seattle, or actually, I don't even know where. This is probably randomly chosen. So where's this guy? If you click on here, you actually see what it's calling. The request URL is that response body Seattle. Looks like it's Seattle again, which is strange. Let's try that again. Oh, now it's New York. Okay. It just randomly selected Seattle twice earlier. But now you can see it's New York. I'll try it again. Now it's Philly. Okay, so I'm randomly selecting as an ID, right, for the city, calling that API. My second endpoint here, I run through some tests, and it's not raining in either of those cities, funny enough. So this is a collection runner. Okay. All right. So you can go on to nodejs.org to figure out how to install Node.js. With Node.js comes with the Node package manager, but you will need to install Newman. And for you Seinfeld fans, Newman's a reference to Newman, the character on Seinfeld, who was a postman. Ha ha ha. So the command line to install Newman is npm install -g for global Newman. All right, which I've already done this on the computer. Now what I'm going to do is bring up PowerShell because I'm on a Windows box and run this Newman command to basically execute my collection just as the collection runner did. All right, open up PowerShell here. I'm gonna have to change the execution policy. Basically, the execution policy PowerShell prevents you from running random PowerShell scripts on your computer. So when I do this, it's gonna say, hey, what's the execution policy? I'm gonna say unrestricted. This execution policy helps protect you from scripts that you do not trust. Do you care? No. Do you want to change the execution policy? Yes, I do. All right, now I've changed it, so I'm gonna clear the screen. Now I'm gonna execute the command, which is Newman run your. Oh, before I do that, sorry. You actually have to specify the file of your collection, and which I didn't show you yet. All right, so here, let me close these up. Oh, sure. It's asking me. I plan to make a change, so it's asking, do I want to save it? I'm going to say save. So you can export these collections. I'll show you how that's done. Export. I clicked on the ellipse here. Export. I do whatever is recommended. Choose my path on my computer, and it always seems to have the collection name dot postman collection. I'm sorry, postman underscore collection dot JSON, which I'll just leave that there. I'm going to overwrite my existing one. Yes, I'm going to do the same thing with my environment variable. You can say download environment. We'll show you what those look like. Let's do the environment variable first. Remember how I was saying there are key value pairs? It's just a JSON file, which is really nice. So here are my variables: my app ID, my city name, my city ID. The value is something I specify in the GUI. These are populated by JavaScript in the code, and just a bunch of other properties here that's auto-generated. But it illustrates that whatever you do in Postman, with your environment variables, your test, it just gets written to a JSON file, which is super portable. And it reads and writes from the same file, so which is nice. So let's take a look at your collection. It's all kinds of JavaScript here, or JSON here, that represents your test. So like get weather by random city ID, and then here's your JavaScript here. Um, Here's my second method. All right, so basically I usually don't even touch this file. I just do it with the GUI, and then export your files out whenever you're ready to run. So back to PowerShell. So where I left off was running this PowerShell file, specifying the Newman command and my collection file, flag E for the environment file, and here's the full path for the environment file. So I'm going to run that command. So this is, I didn't export my test. Remember, when you update, you have to export your files. Export. Okay. Now it does. Didn't seem to pick it up. I wonder why that is. Oh, I probably didn't save it because save then export. All right, now it fails because it is not raining in whatever city you picked. I forgot. It doesn't really gives you all the full details, but essentially what you're looking for is any errors on your test and your assertions. Doesn't tell me. Oh, LA. So hey, it's not raining in LA. All right, so that's how you run this in Newman. So the next task is we want to do essentially the same thing on your build server. So on your build server, you're going to need to go through the process of installing Node.js and Newman, which is very simple, just one line of code, and just so that the Jenkins server, which you will be hosted on that same box, be able to run these npm package and run through all your tests. But how we're going to provide that to the Jenkins server is through a PowerShell file or bash file if you're not on a Windows box. So let me go through real quick what that PowerShell file looks like. I start off with echoing to just console, hey, you're in the PowerShell script now. And you'll see that later on Jenkins when it builds out the file. So I got a couple variables here. The environment workspace is a Jenkins environment variable, and you guys could read that. It's basically specifying the location of where Jenkins will build out your project to. So file name postfix is Postman underscore collection. I know that when you're working in Postman and when you're saving or exporting a collection, it always has that prefix name. Mine, this particular collection is demo test, but tomorrow you could have API 1, 2, 3, whatever your collection name is. Environment file, I'm just explicitly listing out what the file name is for this environment. What you could do in the future is just have as many environment files as you want for like dev, staging, prod, because you could parameterize your URLs, your domain, your virtual directories, and so it gets really nice that you can create one set of tests and run it through different environments. So getting back to this PowerShell file, so basically in JSON files object, I'm saying, hey, get the file names for all those child items, and Visual Studio is gonna die on me. No, it isn't. So, and then you have to change your directory to where you would install, where Newman's available. So when you go into Jenkins build server and you actually install Node and Newman, it typically gets installed under C in your username app data roaming, all right, in this bin directory. So what I end up doing is you can copy um, this directory on into your C drive, just so it doesn't have to run under a particular like user path. So in this file, I'm saying now change to this directory here. When you change that directory, now you have access to the node packages. And this line of code here, I'm doing a for each on this array of file names. And here I just build out the full path for the collection and the environment file. And here I'm saying node.js, because I'm in this directory now. Now I have access to node. This is actually a very important part, because otherwise Jenkins is going to say, hey, node is not a valid command, or rather, Newman is not a command, because typically you just do Newman run, right? But in this PowerShell file, I'm saying node Newman run. Disable Unicode is just so that the printout of the um, Jenkins build is kind of easier to read and formatted nicely. Then here is my collection file, and then flag E, and then my environment file. Since this is in a for each loop, you can have, n number of collections in your directory. Say you have like 5 of these collections. It would just loop through it and run your Newman command and run all your tests sequentially. So, which is great, because if you have a lot of tests, your build server will just handle it all. So last exit code is whatever the results of this was, it just spits out back to Jenkins. All right, so I'm gonna jump on the Jenkins server now. So here's my Jenkins server. I'm gonna create a new item, and remember, I've already installed Node. I've already installed Newman. Remember how I copied, after I installed Newman, I copied that npm all the npm files here, so it has all my Node modules in here. So don't forget to do that. It's a very important part. Otherwise, it won't run. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Jenkins item. I'll say demo test 2. Pick the freestyle project. Click on OK. All right. So let me specify that this is a GitHub project. Here's a project URL. Source code management, Git, very important. Oh, I'm not sure if I mentioned that all these files are in Git. Let me make sure they're up to date. All right, so it's checking in. Status up to date, nothing to commit. All right, so all these files, I put it on in source control. So ideally, you can have these files next to your code projects, right? Your code projects here, and then I check in my test into source control too, so that when you check in code, Jenkins will fire off and run your test. That's in source control. All right, so source code management is a Git repo. I keep saying get her done. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is add a build step, execute batch, Windows batch command. So this is where it gets a little interesting. PowerShell exe, I'm saying, hey, launch this PowerShell. Execution bypass. Remember what I did earlier with the PowerShell file, within PowerShell. I had to do one of set execution policy. It's the same, basically it's the same thing. I'm bypassing that. So I'm saying flag command, I pass it the command. Workspace is a Jenkins variable. I think I mentioned earlier, it just specifies the build location. So let me close all this up. So my build location, my workspace, which is my build location, is in C Jenkins workspace. Here's my folder, and whatever your item is, or this is test demo test 2, which there already is something. I'm probably delete it. I probably did it earlier. Okay. So within my workspace, there's gonna be a Jenkins Postman file, or Postman demo.PowerShell file. Okay. So I'm gonna say save, and there's nothing for demo test 2, right? All right. So I'm gonna build this now. So what it's doing now, it's getting the files from source control, or it's building the project in source control, which there is no project right now. It's just a README file. And now it's going to run my test, or rather, run my PowerShell file, right? Because where am I at? Here's my demo test 2 of the item I just created. It pulled down the files from GitHub, dropped them here, which includes this PowerShell file. I specified that at the command line to say, hey, run that file. And then now it says, hey, you're in that PowerShell script. And that's the beginning line of my PowerShell file. That's why I did that. So I can say where it actually starts. So now that I know it starts, here goes the test. Get weather by random city ID. Looks like it chose whatever this ID is. And then get the city name, and it ends up being Baltimore. And all the tests has passed, except one exertion is a failure. Sorry. Oh, it expects it to include rain. Hey, Baltimore ain't raining. Aren't you guys happy out there? So that's why it's failed. So one step you could do to your server, your build server, is add a configuration to send you an email alert on failures. So I think it's like post build action. You could say email notification, right? And you can kind of set up when it fails, it'll send out an email to the support team or to the developers to kind of expect that. Okay, let me just run this again and see what CD I get now. So I'm running it again. Get random city. Baltimore again. Can't be right. Let's try it again. Build now. Oh, you know what? I know why. It's always going to say Baltimore because Jenkins likes to depend on files that's in the file system. So what you need to configure to do is make it delete its workspace prior to execution. Post build as build step. Delete workspace before build starts. That's what you want. So a success this time. What city did it pick? Boston. So Boston, it's not raining in Boston. Or it is raining in Boston. Contains string raining. So basically that's how it works. So let's do a recap here on the demo. All right, so we did all these steps. Recap. So why do you do this, right? Why do we want to do this? It automates your spot checking. A lot of times we're developing new things or we're deploying things and we're saying, hey, somebody needs to check everything looks good. So, and that's, loosely done. It's not really, it's not thorough, and your test, you can make as thorough as you want, and it's all automated, so you don't have to have a manual process of somebody checking it. part of your continuous integration, right? So if you have your build server to build and on every check-in, now it'll run your integration tests along with your check-in. Um, Also, you're obviously with these integration tests, you're ensuring existing functionality doesn't break when you're developing new ones. So what type of tests can you do? In this demo, I was showing how you could take the response of one request used to another. What I was really trying to do is simulate authentication tokens, right? Because in the real world, you would say, okay, log in as this user or request a token and then use this token for subsequent requests. You may have to do it just logging in, or you may have to do it with each API request after you get issued your authentication token. With these integration tests, it's very helpful that you can capture those tokens and write them to a response, or I'm sorry, write them to like an environment variable to be used elsewhere. If you don't want to do anything complex, you can simply use it as a health checker. Right? Hey, make sure it's a 200, or just so you know your services are up and running. What I like to do uh, is like a real uh, process where you're writing an object. Say you're creating products, and you could write a test like, "Hey, create this potato product," right? Then you could read that potato, and then you could delete the same potato object that you created, so you don't leave any lingering test data out there. So it's full end-to-end testing, reading, writing, deletion. So that's really nice, and it's all automated, and it's as creative as you can get with your business logic. With JavaScript, you could just kind of, use that tool to kind of manipulate whatever the logic is to inspect the response that comes back from your endpoint. Um, the the environment variable files, which is really nice. So with these files, if you use your PowerShell or some other file or scripting language to kind of loop through your collections of files, and then you have an environment file for each uh, development region, right? Your development, your staging, your production. You can actually, what I would recommend doing is when you have your endpoints, you can parameterize like your domain URL. So I don't know why it's hanging up. So for instance, API dot open weather app. You could have it say, you could have an environment variable that says dev, which is API-dev, right? And then you could parameterize your tests with that variable value. And you do that for your whole URL. So basically what I'm getting at is creating one sets of tests, one collection in one environment file, and then running the same test in multiple different environments. So you don't have to maintain like multiple copies of tests. You just have to have different environment files. So what is it not good for? It's not used for performance testing and load testing. Somebody had asked if we could run these, can we run these requests? Why are they running sequential order, right? Well, it's used for integration testing. Can you run them all simultaneously? Uh, I don't think you could do that in Postman. And the only reason why you would do it simultaneously if you're trying to basically slam your server for your performance and load tests and see how much load your APIs can take at one time and things like that. This is not the tool for that purpose. So you're gonna have to look into different tools for that. The same thing for UI testing. So you're gonna have to use another tool for that. But what I do like about using Postman is you don't really have to compile anything. I mean, and it's all done with JavaScript, which is very like a common language that developers should know, and it gets you up and running pretty quickly. So that is pretty much the conclusion of demo. I'll provide all the useful URLs and um, uh, the location of where my GitHub project is, which will include your PowerShell file and these Postman generated JSON files. All right, thank you.